Yo, what is up, doggies? It's your boy Beanie Kowloon. In today's video, we're taking another look at the wacky and wild world of psychedelics. I found this absolutely massive psychedelic iceberg, and I'd just be a fool not to break it down and make a video on it, because I'm guessing that this video is going to get me an absolutely massive amount of views. So to all you doggies just joining me just because this is an iceberg video, please subscribe, please like, please check out my other videos, because for some reason iceberg videos are my only videos that seem to actually get like a lot of views. But yeah, the psychedelic iceberg, obviously I'm going to have to cover that, but before we get into it, obviously I want to say I do not endorse the use of any psychedelics or any drugs. I'm just talking about them because, well, they're wild and wacky, and it's just an interesting topic. Now again, this iceberg is absolutely massive, so I'm just gonna do one layer per video, but don't you worry, there's a lot of juicy stuff just in this first layer. But yeah, without any further ado, let's just jump right into this iceberg, doggies. Oregon Psilocybin Service System. In Oregon since 2020, they offer what they call psilocybin services to anyone struggling with mental health conditions. In Oregon, they have licensed facilitators who will give their clients a dose of psilocybin and then sit with them throughout the trip and help them integrate this experience into improving their life. As of now, they're using psilocybin to try to help with depression, anxiety, trauma, and addiction. You have to be at least 21 to qualify for this, and all these facilitated trips are extremely professional, and it's 100% legal in Oregon. Now, I mean, that doesn't mean that you can just buy psychedelics in Oregon, but it does mean that Oregon recognizes the potential medical use of psilocybin. Alright, next on the iceberg, LSD makes you jump out windows. Now, as someone who's tripped acid like 20 plus times, I can safely say that I've never jumped out a window or even really came close to jumping out a window. But with that being said, I'm sure there's been a countless fools who were tripping sack on acid and decided to jump out the window for some reason or another. LSD and other psychedelics can get pretty wacky and wild, and if it's something you're not ready for and you don't have anyone taking care of you, there's definitely potential of you hurting yourself. But yeah, it's pretty unlikely that you're going to take LSD and decide to jump out a window. This is just another one of those myths around LSD, like when people say if you take LSD too much, you're going to get convinced you're an orange and try to peel yourself to death. But if I had to guess how this rumor began, I have a feeling it has something to do with the story of Frank Olson, one of the first LSD trips ever, where the dog Frank Olson ended up jumping out of a 13-story window, killing himself. And it was in fact the acid that made him jump out this window, deciding to kill himself. But the thing about this story is, Frank Olson did not even know that he had taken acid, nor did he even know what the drug was. Frank Olson was a part of the CIA, and in 1953, other members of the CIA had discovered a drug, LSD, and believed that it could be used for mind control. While at a CIA cocktail party, some agents thought it would be a good idea, or maybe they just thought it would be a funny prank, to dose Frank Olson with LSD without him even knowing what the drug was. And well, I can only imagine what this dude Frank Olson went through, as he took this LSD without having any knowledge of what it was. Like, that just must be completely terrifying. I'm sure jumping out the window at that point seemed like a logical solution, because I mean, he probably thought he was literally going insane. And to make this case even more fucked up, the CIA completely covered up his death, telling his family that this was just a normal suicide, not telling them anything about the LSD. And the truth about this case wasn't found out until like 20 plus years later, when people discovered the MK Ultra files and figured out all this messed up shit the government was doing with LSD and mind control. Decriminalize nature. If I had to guess what this layer is saying, it's probably saying the fact that, psychedelics are natural, so therefore they shouldn't be illegal. We got DMT literally inside our brain. You can't make it illegal for me to smoke this stuff, man. But that being said, just because something is natural doesn't really mean it should be legal, in my opinion. Like, literally everything on this world is natural. Like, coke and heroin are both natural substances. That doesn't really mean it's safe to take. And the whole argument that, just natural things are better than things made in a lab is it's just not true. Like, LSD is made completely in a lab, while psilocybin is completely natural, but neither one of them are really better or worse for you. Like, I see countless people saying they'll only take shrooms because it's natural, LSD is too scary because it's made in a lab, and I mean, if you're getting real LSD, it is not any more dangerous than psilocybin. I mean, it really doesn't mean anything if it's made in a laboratory. Like, how do you think we get all the medications in the world? How do you think we get Adderall, Zoloft, anyone who's prescribed anything, that shit's made in a lab. It doesn't make it bad for them. I know I'm kind of going on a tangent, but it's just, there's no reason to think natural substances are better for you than man-made substances. Like, come on, doggies. Set and setting. Now, if you've done any research on psychedelics and how to have a good trip, I'm sure you've heard this saying that you need to have a good set and setting. And this refers to the state of mind you're in and the place you decide to trip at, and all the people you're with, because all these things are incredibly big factors on deciding how your trip will go. For instance, if you were to trip sack in your grungy ass basement right after failing your math test, you're probably gonna end up fighting off some demons during your trip. But if you were to trip sack, on vacation with trusted people in a nice environment, it's gonna feel like you're frolicking through the strawberry fields, doggy. Psychedelics are not drugs you can take when you're sad and expect to feel happy. Whatever emotion you're feeling when you go into a psychedelic experience is only going to get amplified once it begins. So if you're going to trip, make sure you have a nice set and setting. DARE. The notorious DARE. Now, the DARE program has gotten a lot of hate over the years, and rightfully so. The DARE program attempts to scare children away from doing drugs by having a police officer come in and tell real-hand accounts on drug use that they've witnessed and how it's affected people's lives. And on paper this sounds like a good idea, but it's all very just anti-drug hysteria. Like, it's just like telling you if you take these drugs you're gonna die and you should just never do it under no circumstance. And while on paper this sounds like a good idea, they're teaching this to like 6th and 7th graders, and I mean, when I was at that age and I had this police officer telling me all this shit, like, I was at a bit of a rebellious age, I didn't really care what they had to say. I mean, the whole basis of the class is just like, never take any drugs ever, or you're probably gonna die. Like, I remember she told a story about a 21-year-old girl who had like a couple shots on her birthday and ended up throwing up and dying in her sleep. And while telling these horror stories might scare off some kids from trying drugs, I feel like it's really not the most effective method to keep kids away from drugs. I feel as if this program would be a lot more helpful and effective if instead of police officers teaching the course, they had addiction specialists and maybe people who struggled with addiction, maybe even some talk about mental health. Because honestly, it's not usually the drug compound that's so dangerous, it's the amount that these people abuse it, and this all stems back to, mental health problems or just depression or whatever the reason is that they decide to abuse these substances. The education that public schools give on drugs is often just fear-mongering and even exaggerating the dangers of these drugs, which oftentimes will lead people to doing their own research and thinking that everything that they learn in these classes is just false. I remember in like my 10th grade health class when we were on the drug unit, we had a test about all these drugs, and one of the questions was asking what was the effects of shrooms, and the correct answer was that it will make you hallucinate, and it also has the chance of literally making your stomach explode. Like, they're literally teaching stuff that's factually incorrect, which is just going to lead kids to wanting to research and experiment on their own. Basically what I'm trying to say is fuck DARE, it's lame and stupid. Thought loop. Ah yes, the classic thought loop. I've spent many trippy eternities trapped in these, always very confusing, scary, and just frustrating experiences. And for those of you who are lucky enough to have never experienced getting lost in the sauce of your own mind, I found this YouTube video that basically perfectly conveys a thought loop.
Dude, you have already had all these thoughts.
Okay, so I'm in a thought loop. I'll think of something else.
You've already tried that and there was nothing else. You gotta ride it out. Oh.
Okay, but I've already thought of that. Yeah, dude, because you're in a thought loop.
Oh, okay, well then I'll just think of something else. No, you gotta write it out.
So yeah, if you're still confused what a thought loop is, it's basically when you just can't think of any new thoughts. You just keep circling around the same thought and you can't figure out why. Turn on, tune in, drop out. This is a quote from Timothy Leary, who was a very popular hippie in like the 60s and a big part of the counterculture movement. He was basically an icon to, all the hippies in the 60s and, the deadheads and, all that shit that was going on. He's a big proponent of psychedelic drug use and, just becoming spiritual and one with the universe and, all that jazz.
McLuhan said, if you want to change your mind, change the medium. Change the words you use. Change the mode of communication. If you change the medium, you change yourself, you change your society.
Now, I'm not really the biggest Timothy Leary follower. I haven't really read any of his books or listened to any of his speeches or really know what he's all about. But what I did do is I did take a look at what this quote means, and I'm gonna break that down for you doggies. Turn on essentially means you gotta take some psychedelic drugs. Turn on also refers to, just being aware that there's multiple levels of consciousness and that we're all connected and, shit like that, just being spiritual. Tune in refers to taking in, the world and its people and, just everything around you and just basically just enjoy life or enjoy your trip. And drop out refers to dropping out of any structures that, like make you conform, like a job or college or school. Basically just only focusing on yourself and what makes you happy, not doing anything to conform to others. Basically just be yourself and experience life in any way that makes you happy. Threshold dose. A threshold dose is pretty simply just a smaller dose of psychedelics, such a small dose that you barely notice the effects. A threshold dose will vary based on the substance and its potency, but an average threshold dose for LSD is like 20 milligrams. and an average threshold dose for shrooms is like half a gram. On a threshold dose, you're barely going to notice the effects of these substances. You probably won't see any visuals, but you are going to feel something mentally, and you're definitely going to feel like just a bit high. When trying any new substance, it's always smart to start with a threshold dose. Ego death. Now, on the contrary of a threshold dose, ego death is when you ingest just far too many psychedelics. These are very intense experiences that are going to vary depending on who you ask, but typically an ego death will involve forgetting or no longer feeling attached to your body and ego. Instead, you feel a part of everything. Many will even feel an interconnectedness between the world and their consciousness. It's some wacky shit. To me, it just basically felt like I became everything and also nothing at the same time, if that makes any sense. And in the psychedelic community, this is often a sought after experience, as it's basically like the ultimate level of tripping sack. But let me just say, as someone who chased after this experience for many years and took a bunch of psychedelic drugs, once I finally encountered it, it is not what you'd expect. It is a lot more intense and even a bit spooky than you might expect. But yeah, it's some pretty wild and wacky shit. Like, you literally just remember that you're God. Like, I don't know, or at least I did. 1950s housewives on LSD. As it sounds, in the 1950s, there was a recorded experiment that took place where people would give LSD to housewives, ask them questions, and to see how the trip went.
Well, tell me.
Well, I just couldn't. I couldn't possibly tell you. It's here. Can't you feel it? This whole room. This everything is in color, and I can feel the air. I can see it. I can see all the molecules.
This footage originally broadcasted on TV in the late 50s on a show called Focus on Your Sanity. This was a show that had 30-minute programs that all focused on mental health and mental illness. The footage was then rediscovered and uploaded onto YouTube, where most people have seen it today. This original footage was recorded during a very early time in LSD's history when no one really knew at all what it was. At the time, LSD was actually referred to as a psychoneurotic drug, which means that the drug was known to simulate psychosis. At this time, most people thought LSD didn't have much more of a purpose than being used as a weapon. People thought that they could use it to get the truth out of people, torture people, or just make people go insane. But not everyone thought that this drug could just be used as a weapon. A lot of people saw the spiritual side to it and how it could bring you deeper to yourself and your mind. Specifically, Sidney Cohen, who is a psychiatrist and professor of medicine. Sidney Cohen believed figuring out how this drug works would also help us figure out how our mind works, and he's the one who performed these experiments on the 1950s housewives. This experiment helped illustrate the very possible beneficial effects that LSD could have on people's minds.
Can't you feel it? Everything is so beautiful and lovely and alive. You shouldn't say anything about anything not being. This is reality.
This experiment was one of the first times people tried to look at the possible positives of LSD instead of all that MK Ultra shit where they were trying to mind control and just fuck people up. And on top of all that, this video makes for a fire YouTube video 60 plus years later. Woodstock. Everyone knows what Woodstock is, and if you don't, it's time for you to watch the Jimi Hendrix National Anthem guitar solo, because it's pretty epic. But if you somehow don't know what Woodstock is, it was one of the biggest counterculture music festivals of all time during the biggest counterculture revolution that we've ever seen in the United States. Like 1969, which is when Woodstock took place, is just when the hippies were just completely taking over America. This was like right after the CIA basically just gave acid to all these colleges, getting all these kids to take it and drop out and free their mind. And this is also the same time we had all these spiritual gurus popping up like Timothy Leary and Alan Watts and just much more. Nearly 500,000 people attended Woodstock, most of whom didn't even pay and just snuck right in, as the people who set up Woodstock didn't really set up the greatest security, and there were just hundreds of thousands of hippies just trying to get in with no money, and they ended up getting in. And with all these hippies being in one place with all this great music playing, there was tons of drugs being sold, mostly psychedelics. I mean, even today, if you go to any festival, you're sure to find some drugs. There's also just a bunch of great stories about Woodstock, like Carlos Santano's legendary performance that he did whilst on acid, or the fact that The Who was dosed acid unknowingly and then still also gave a legendary performance. And also during this performance, some social political activist known as Abby Hoffman, who was also tripping sack, ended up hopping on stage, grabbing the mic and trying to, to spit some political shit. And the guitarist of The Who ended up knocking Abby Hoffman in the back of the head with his guitar for, just being a complete fucking idiot and taking the mic during their show. Sadly, you can't really find any recordings of this, but there is an audio recording of this moment, which, is at least something.
I think this is a pile of shit while John Sinclair rots in prison. I could dig it.
Even though there's no visual footage of this incident, it's still pretty funny to hear the whole crowd just erupt in joy when they knock this fucking idiot off the stage. And it's also pretty funny when Pete Townshend hops back on the mic and says, "I can dig it." Like, what a fucking bloody legend, you know? Microdosing. Microdosing is when you take such a small amount of psychedelics that you don't even feel the effects, but it allegedly improves mood, focus, and just thinking outside of the box. Many rich and famous people tend to microdose. Some famous examples are Joe Rogan, Miley Cyrus, Mike Tyson, and many, many more celebrities. But other than just famous celebrities, a lot of people in the tech world tend to microdose, specifically in places like Silicon Valley. It is known to be very popular. And there's actually a pretty funny example in Silicon Valley that shows when microdosing, can go wrong. And that is the story of what happened to Justin Zhu, who was once the CEO of a $2 billion company known as Interible Incorporated. Now, Justin Zhu was apparently microdosing every day before work as he thought it gave him a step up on the competition, and I mean, apparently it probably did considering he was the CEO of a $2 billion company. But one day before work, he accidentally gave himself a dose that was bigger than a microdose and ended up going to work while just tripping sack. And while you can't really have your CEO just tripping sack at work because, it's kind of a bad look. And this incident ended up getting him fired as his position of CEO. And while Justin Zhu did not take this lightly, he's actually trying to sue this company right now for $200 million, and he claims the microdose incident was not the real reason he was fired from his job, but the real reason was Asian discrimination. And while my opinion on this is I think this dude Justin might still be tripping sack, because I highly doubt he was fired for Asian discrimination. It seems a lot more likely he was fired for the reason that he went to work while tripping sack. Now, I could be wrong because I don't really know too much about this situation. If I am, that's very fucked up that they would, fire him just because of his race. But in my opinion, it was probably because he took too much LSD before work. Alan Watts. Alan Watts is mostly known for bringing the ideas from Japanese, Chinese, and Indian religions to the Western society. He spread the ideas of Buddhism, which is really all about, just like losing your ego and becoming one with the universe, which is quite similar to the ideas that psychedelics could teach you. He was also a big proponent of, creating your own universe. He believed that we need to integrate the material with the spiritual. Now, I'm not really too sure what that means, but y'all can go watch his lectures if you want to go find out. And yeah, he also heavily fucked with psychedelics. Now, I'm sorry if, this breakdown of Alan Watts is very shitty, because I'm sure any Alan Watts fans out there are going to be like, yo, that is not what he stood for. He stood for so much more, but in my opinion, I really don't care about any of these psychedelic spiritual gurus. Unless, of course, that spiritual guru is Terrence McKenna, because, that dog just got the best voice. And, he's a legit scientist that just focused on psychedelics. Like, that dog is cool. Like, I don't got time to waste my energy on any of these other gurus. I'll watch my Terrence McKenna speeches. So yeah, sorry to any Alan Watts fans out there, but I just don't really want to research this man this much. It's also because I'm pretty lazy. I can't lie. MDMA puts holes in your brain. Now, MDMA does not really put holes in your brain. This is just another myth or an exaggeration about how dangerous these drugs are, but don't get me wrong, MDMA can be pretty toxic to the brain. Now, I went through the effort of skimming through a scientific peer-reviewed study on the dangers of MDMA, and let me read you a little excerpt on what these smart scientists are saying. When discussing some issues that could arise from abusing MDMA, they say, the manifestations of this neurotoxicity in terms of altered cerebral function and behavioral change range from neuroendocrine impairments to defects in verbal memory and reasoning, short-term memory and semantic recognition and visual memory. Now that shit was not easy to read with my lisp, and also I'm not entirely sure what it means, but basically it doesn't sound promising to the brain. If you just think about it logically, MDMA does raise your dopamine to extremely high levels, and the next couple days, you're going to be lacking on dopamine. So, if you abuse it, it might just completely fuck up your dopamine levels. And also, anecdotal stories about abusing MDMA, a lot of people tend to say that MDMA just loses its magic after you do it a certain amount of times. MDMA stops feeling like this completely loving drug where everything's just magic and happiness, and it really just turns into any ordinary stimulant like meth or cocaine. It's really not something you want to abuse, and it's a drug you should take with a lot of caution. Just because there's very low death rates of this drug doesn't mean it can't be very dangerous to you and your mind. Now, the dog who made this iceberg could have been tripping sack, because he did write turn on, tune in, drop out twice, and I'm not going to go over the same thing twice. Psychedelic psychotherapy. As it sounds, this is when you use psychedelics mixed with therapy to try to help with mental health. They're doing this in places like Oregon, as I previously discussed, and also organizations like MAPS do a ton of research on this, which I'll be talking about more later in this iceberg. To me, this sounds like a great next step of how people can use psychedelics to actually help them with their mental health, because in my opinion, psychedelics definitely have the ability to, help you see things in a different perspective or just get a better outlook on life. But the thing is, when you're taking psychedelics on your own or with friends, you don't always get all these benefits, because without a controlled environment, it's really impossible to tell if a psychedelic trip is actually going to be good for you. While in my opinion, psychedelics can definitely be used as a medicine, without understanding the proper doses and the proper setting you need, it really just doesn't work. So in my opinion, psychedelic therapy could be a huge step for how we perceive psychedelics, and it could also hugely help with mental health when other methods just aren't quite working. MAPS. MAPS is a non-profit organization that does research on psychedelics and its possible beneficial effects on mental illness and mental health. They have been around for over 30 years and have been a huge proponent of psychedelic therapy, and also have found many medical uses for MDMA. They have found many potential benefits of MDMA, such as helping with PTSD, anxiety disorders, and eating disorders. Most notably is their research that they have done on MDMA for people with PTSD, but I'll be speaking on that more later on this iceberg. But basically, MAPS has done a lot to show that these psychedelics do definitely have medical purposes, and they're just one of the biggest organizations doing legit research on how psychedelics could actually help benefit us in many ways. Oh, and they do research on the possible medical effects of weed.
Smoke weed every day.
Ramdas. Ramdas is yet another spiritual guru in the psychedelic scene. He wrote many books and gave many lectures, most notably his book about becoming nobody, which essentially means accepting you're a part of nature, losing your ego, and just accepting that we're all one. He famously said, "The game is not about becoming somebody, it's about becoming nobody." And I agree with the messages that, he spits out, but, in my opinion, I don't really like following any of these spiritual gurus, because anyone who claims to know all the answers to life and, just how to live and what we need to do is usually full of bullshit. In my opinion, no one really knows the answers to life or why we're here, but that doesn't mean you can't get some helpful takeaways from, listening to his philosophies. I'm sure he's helped many people get just a better perspective on life and, why we're here and just what's really important to them. But in my opinion, I just really don't care to listen to any of these spiritual gurus. But yeah, I'm sure Ramdas is a pretty smart and profound dude. Honestly, I'm just kind of a lazy bastard and don't really want to do too much research. MDMA for PTSD. As I mentioned before, MAPS have done a lot of research to suggest that MDMA could be very helpful for people struggling with PTSD. The research they have done has shown, in patients with PTSD, MDMA has shown to decrease feelings of fear and defenselessness, increase feelings of well-being, increase sociability and extroversion, increase interpersonal trust, and help create an alert state of consciousness. Their studies have found that 88% of participants with severe PTSD experienced a clinical significant reduction in PTSD diagnostic scores 2 months after their third sessions of MDMA-assisted therapy. They've also done this same study without MDMA to test the placebo effect, and only 60% of those participants noticed any improvement with their PTSD, so there does seem to be some scientific reasoning on why MDMA therapy could actually be very helpful for people struggling with PTSD. They also found that additionally 67% of participants in the MDMA group compared to the 32% of participants in the placebo group no longer met the criteria for PTSD 2 months after their sessions. So yeah, MDMA might just be the cure to PTSD. LSD changes your chromosomes. No, LSD does not really change your chromosomes, but this is something that was widely reported upon in the late 60s and the early 70s. There was a report in 1967 where 2 scientists found that LSD had increased the rate of abnormal changes to the chromosomes. This report was widely reported on in the media and was used as some kind of propaganda to try to keep people away from LSD. But then later in 1971, this study was just completely disproven. It was found that LSD actually has no effect on your chromosome, and in fact LSD was only found to affect your serotonin receptors in your brain. So there you have it, doggies. There's part 1 of the psychedelic iceberg, and if you like this video and want to see a part 2, you know the drill. Drop a like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. And if you guys really enjoy my content, I heavily recommend you guys join the Discord. It's really just a great place that I can communicate with all you guys. We're really starting to build up a family of dogs in the Discord, and it's really just a great time, and on top of that, I drop hella music recommendations in there, so I mean, if any of you doggies really just want to communicate with me or see what kind of music I like or just see what I'm really like, please join the Discord. And not only will you get to chat and chill with me, you'll get to chat and chill with all the other doggies that watch my content, and trust me, everyone in the Discord is some cool doggies. We're all family in there, and it's just good vibes. But yeah, that's all I have to say about that. I really hope you guys enjoyed this video. The bangers are never gonna stop. Comment on the Beanie Kowloon channel. And as always, peace out, doggies.